Hi, Thriller Movies Recap here. Today I am going to show you a horror movie from 2019, so relax and enjoy. Spoilers ahead, watch out. At the beginning of the movie, Calvin is seen driving Becky, who is 6 months pregnant, to San Diego. She feels nauseous and Calvin pulls over outside an old church. She tells Calvin she might be making a mistake going to San Diego, and he tells him to think about no one except her well-being. They hear a boy named Tobin shouts for help in the tall grass. They also hear his mother, Natalie, telling Tobin to stop calling for help. Becky tells Calvin they should help, that the woman sounds weird. Tobin keeps calling for help. Becky and Calvin feels concerned and decides to help. Calvin quickly runs into the tall grass and Becky walks in after a bit of hesitation after telling Calvin to wait for her. Becky calls 911. The call disconnects and loses network connection. She calls out to Calvin but couldn't find or hear his voice. As Calvin gets farther into the tall grass, he couldn't hear Tobin's voice anymore. Calvin calls out to Becky. Becky tells him she called 911 but she lost connection and asks him if his phone is working. He tells Becky he left his phone in the car. Calvin calls out to Tobin and tells him to stop moving around and stay still. Becky tells Calvin something is not right, that they should go back. They tried to locate each other but could not. Becky tells him they should both jump and raise their hands. They both jump and see each other's hands. Becky tells Calvin he is close and they should jump again. They jump the second time and couldn't see each other. They discover that the distance from each other changes unnaturally. Calvin runs in the grass calling out for Becky and falls to the ground. He raises his head and sees blood on the grass. He goes closer and sees a dead dog with flies all over it. Calvin tells Becky that he is getting freaked out. She tells Calvin they just need to keep their heads and assures him they will get out of there. As the day gets dark, Calvin tells Becky to save her voice, that he will come to her. While she waits, a man named Ross comes out and she gets scared. He tells Becky he is Tobin's father and asks her to follow him if he wants to leave the tall grass. She hesitates and Ross tells her he's looking for his wife Natalie and Tobin, his son, that they are lost in there. He tells Becky they should stick together as it is going to be dark soon, and Becky asks Ross to help her find Calvin. At night, as Calvin gets worried that he will never find Becky, Tobin shows up with a dead crow in his hands and tells him he can find things but it's easier once they're dead. He tells Calvin that the field doesn't move dead things around as he buried the crow. Calvin asks him if he lured them in there. Tobin tells him they heard a man yelling and calling for help, that's how they got in. He tells Calvin that Becky is going to die soon. Calvin asks him how he knew Becky is his sister, and he tells him that the rock teaches how to hear the tall grass and the tall grass knows everything. Calvin asks Tobin if he knew where to find Becky, and he tells Calvin he can take him to her. Ross and Becky talks about her pregnancy as they walk in the tall grass. As they talk, Becky steps on something. As she looks down, she sees a pair of scissors, a container, a small bag and some human hair. She looks up and Ross was gone. As she calls out for Calvin, she got attacked by an unseen figure. Tobin takes Calvin to an ancient rock. He touches the rock and asks Calvin to touch it. Calvin goes close to the rock and sees markings. As he tries to touch it, he gets interrupted by Becky's scream and Tobin tells him it's too late. He runs calling out for Becky. Tobin tells him he will never find her that way. Travis, the father of Becky's child, goes looking for her. He sees their car parked in front of the old church. He looks around and checks inside the church but didn't find anyone. He picks up a book in front of the tall grass and sees Becky's name written on it and goes in. As he steps into the tall grass, he uses the sun as guide and makes a mark by folding some part of the grasses. As he leaves, the grasses unties itself. He keeps going and notices the sun has changed direction and finds it weird. As it gets dark, Travis lies down to rest and hears a sound. As he goes to check, he sees Tobin. Tobin tells him they know each other and they are connected, but Travis tells him they are not. Tobin tells Travis the reason he came into the tall grass is to find Becky. Travis asks him if he can take him to Becky and he tells Travis to follow him. Tobin leads Travis to Becky's corpse and tells him that the field doesn't move dead things. As Travis grieves, he loses sight of Tobin. In the morning, he wakes up and goes close to Becky's body and picks up her necklace. Tobin is seen with his parent Ross, Natalie and Freddie, their dog. Travis calls out to Tobin for help. He tells his mom that he hears his name and the person knows him. The dog runs into the tall grass and Tobin follows. Ross and Natalie go after Tobin and they get lost in the field. As night falls, Ross is seen moving around in the tall grass as he talks to himself, blaming Natalie for not keeping an eye on Tobin. He sees the old rock and touches it. In the morning, we are taken back to where the movie began as Becky and Calvin re-enters the tall grass to look for Tobin after hearing him call for help. Travis hears Becky and Calvin's voice and calls out for them, telling them he is in there. They ask Travis how he got there and he told them he came looking for Becky. Travis hears Tobin and asks him if he is okay. Travis tells him not to move, that they will find him. Travis tells Tobin to keep talking and tells Calvin and Becky to find Tobin. Becky tells him they have tried that before and it didn't work, but Travis tells them it will work this time. Tobin is seen standing beside the dead dog with flies all over it. They all find Tobin and Travis tells them that the field doesn't move dead things. Travis tells them they have been gone for more than 2 months and he had to look for Becky. He tells them they need to leave the tall grass, but Calvin tells him they need a plan. As they argue, Becky tells them they should leave, that someone is watching them and she can feel it. Travis carries Tobin on his shoulder. He looks around and tells them he sees a building and it's far from where they are. As they move in the direction of the building, Becky feels a discomfort and tells them the baby kicked. She tells Travis the baby is due in 3 months and it's a girl and will name her Ginny. Becky's phone rings and Calvin picks the call. They hear a strange voice telling Becky not to allow Calvin hurt Travis or they will keep making the same mistake, and it disconnects. A fly perches on Becky's face and enters her nose and she screams as blood comes out of her body. She falls to the ground and hallucinates seeing strange things. Ross shows up and performs CPR on her and she regains consciousness. Ross tells them they will leave once he finds Natalie. Calvin asks him if he found a way out. He tells them he got to the road but wasn't going to leave without his family. Travis tells him they were heading towards a building when he asks them where they were heading. It gets dark as they move around. Ross takes them to the old rock. As he tells them about the rock, Becky tells him they didn't come for sightseeing and he was going to show them the way out. Calvin asks him if there is a map on it and Ross tells him to touch the rock. Calvin makes an attempt to touch the rock and Natalie shows up and warns him not to touch it. She tells them that Ross is dangerous and everything he told them is a lie. Natalie sees Becky and gets frightened, telling them she saw Becky some ways back and she wasn't alive. Natalie also told them he saw Ross and he was going to hurt her. Ross tells her he wasn't going to hurt anyone, that they are together now and they are family. Becky feels a discomfort and bends. As she looks up she sees strange beings and also Ross. She tells them they should leave and Travis tells Ross they want to go their own way and asks Natalie if she would come with them and she agrees. Ross tells them to touch the rock because they were brought into the grass for a reason. He tells them once they touch it all their trespasses will melt away. Travis tells him to let Natalie go as he is outnumbered and they can overpower him. He tells Travis he is not afraid. He tells them it's better they come to the rock and open up their heart on their own like he did. As he turns to Natalie, Travis grabs and pushes him to the ground, punching him as he tells them to run. Ross gets out of his grip as he hits Travis. He holds Travis down and tells him when he touches the rock he will know everything he knows and also what the grass knows. Travis screams as Ross dislocates his shoulder. He catches Natalie as she tries to run. Tobin screams and Ross tells him not to worry, that it is just flesh and flesh is grass, and he kills Natalie. As Calvin, Becky, Travis and Tobin run, he tells them to save their breath, that they can't run from redemption. They stumble on an abandoned building and runs into it to hide, and Calvin helps Travis fix his dislocated shoulder. Calvin blames Travis for everything, but Becky tells him it won't solve anything. He reminds her of Travis throwing her out of the house and telling her to abort the baby. Becky tells him he doesn't need his brotherly love. Travis tells Calvin that the real reason Calvin never liked him is because he feels nobody is good enough for Becky. As they argue and fight, they hear Ross bang on the door and they run up to the top and use a rod to hold the door. Travis tells them Ross can't get through without breaking it with a sledgehammer, and Calvin complains that they are stuck up there. Travis tells them that when he was coming, he saw the building and Becky said she saw it too, and that the church is on the other side. Travis and Calvin moves towards the edge of the building and sees the church. They look down and sees Tobin's dog, but it vanishes. They climb on top of an object and see the dog across moving towards the church. Travis tells Calvin that there is a hole and it might be a way out. He slips and loses his step. Calvin catches him but leaves him and Travis falls to the ground. He turns and sees Tobin staring at him. Calvin hears Ross singing as he climbs to the roof. He runs to Becky and tells her they have to leave. As they run, Becky stops to wait for Travis, but Calvin tells her to forget about him. She noticed that something has happened to Travis and goes in search of him, leaving Calvin. Ross catches up with Calvin. He tells him he thought he would lose his sister when he gets out and that the baby would bring Becky and Travis together. He tells Calvin he is right, but he is mistaken to think he is ever leaving. Calvin runs and Ross catches him. He turns and sees dead bodies all over the place. He screams and Ross chokes him to death. Travis gets up as he hears Becky's voice. As he searches for her, she asks him what happened and he tells her he thinks that her brother loves her a little too much and it is his fault because he had his chance with her and he threw it away. Travis tells her whatever happens he is glad she didn't listen to him and kept the baby. Becky tells him she got scared and was going to give out the baby and didn't think she was ready to be a mom, that's why they were going to San Diego. She wanted to give out the child to a family there. Travis asks if she didn't want to do it anymore. She tells him they're stuck there and won't get out. Travis tells her he is going to find a way that their baby deserves to live. Travis tells her he wished he could just touch her hand as they both stretches out their hand. He hears Becky scream as Ross grabs her. Ross takes her and she tries to stab him with a key but he stops her and tells her that he'd tussle with Natalie there for the first time when he tried to show her the way. He tries to rape Becky as he puts her on the ground. Becky picks up a pair of scissors and stabs him on the eye. He screams and Becky runs away from him. As it rains she sees strange beings with grasses on their faces. She screams and loses consciousness as they carried her. She opens her eyes and finds herself in front of the old rock with strange markings. As she screams out for Travis, she sees a cell phone. She puts a call across and said Calvin should not be allowed to hurt Travis or they will keep making the same mistake again. As she gives birth to her baby, the ground abruptly opens up close to the rock with souls beneath it calling out for her. She moves back as she continues to scream and loses consciousness. She opens her eyes and sees Calvin feeding her. She asks him what he is feeding her and he tells her it's just grass and seeds as he smiles. He continues to feed her and tells her she ate it all. She opens her eyes and sees Ross. As she turns, she sees that her baby has been slaughtered and she screams losing consciousness. In the morning Travis is seen calling out for Becky. He comes to where the rock is and finds Becky there. She calls out for her baby in a faint voice. Travis looks up and sees the baby dead. Tobin shows up and tells Travis that Ross killed the baby and Calvin too. He tells Travis that Ross is going to keep killing and he is not going to stop. Travis hugs Tobin and tells him he won't allow anyone hurt him. Tobin tells him Ross is watching them. Travis challenges Ross to come out and kill him too. He comes out and beats Travis telling him Becky took his eye but he is better off without it as eyes are deceiving around there. He holds Travis and tried to drown him. He kicks Ross and gets away from him. Ross dips his hand into the ground and brings out a bone of a dead person. He tells Travis what he wanted was to help him find redemption and stabs him on the stomach. Ross runs after Tobin and catches him telling him it's his turn to touch the rock. As he takes Tobin's hand to touch the rock, Becky takes the bone and stabs him on the other eye. As Ross screams, Travis gets up and hits his head severely on the rock. He pushes Travis to the ground but Travis overpowers him. He pulls out grass from the ground and uses it to strangle Ross, killing him. Travis moves towards the rock. Tobin begs him not to touch the rock, that if he does, he will never leave. He touches the rock and his eyes turn. He goes to Tobin and tells him to follow him as he drags him along. He stops and tells Tobin he is not leaving. He tells Tobin that he doesn't belong there and gives him Becky's necklace. He tells Tobin not to let them into the tall grass. As he carries Tobin and puts him down, Tobin is seen in the church. He opens the door and walks outside. Tobin sees Becky and Calvin as they try to go into the tall grass. He runs towards them telling Becky not to go in there. He tells them if they go in they will never get out and he hands over the necklace to Becky. Becky takes it and compares with the one she has with her and asks Tobin where he got it. He tells her that Travis gave it to him. Becky stops Calvin from going into the grass. He shows both necklaces to Calvin and tells him Travis gave it to Tobin to give to her. Tobin tells them he will explain later that they have to leave the place immediately. In the car, Becky tells Calvin they should take Tobin to Topeka and finds a police station. Calvin tells her it's back where they came from and she tells Calvin she should have never left. Calvin asks her about the family in San Diego but Becky tells him she has her own family now. Travis is shown in the tall grass as he falls to the ground.
Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.